and out of carving ivory. Now, the debate on ivory is a big debate, and it's very controversial. The rights and wrongs of it. There's a movement that wants to ban it altogether. In fact, you're not allowed, even in England, to buy ivory that was produced after 1947, which I think was the CITES arrangement, where they wouldn't allow people to buy and sell ivory items because of the poaching. Now, I'm totally against poaching. Poaching is a terrible thing, and it ought to be stamped out, and anybody who's involved in poaching should the law should come down on them as hard as possible to prevent animals from being slaughtered just for their teeth. But the fact that animals, elephants for instance, they don't live forever. And sooner or later, even though they're protected, an elephant, if left to its own devices, will eventually die. And if it's got tusks, once an animal has died of natural causes, I don't really see as there's any harm in taking those tusks and carving them into artifacts. Now, it's very difficult to know. I mean, I bought a piece here of ivory, well, what I believe to be ivory, and it's a beautifully carved little figurine. It's a netski again, but this is almost certainly carved of ivory. Now, I bought it hoping, and I bought it at a local craft fair, that this was actually carved and made before 1947. Because, as I say, people aren't allowed to buy modern ivory. But it's very difficult to tell how old a piece of ivory is. So I'm sure there's a lot of ivory on the market which is what we could call modern ivory. And as a result of that, poaching still goes on, because people still want a job, they want to carve ivory. And this opens up an area of smuggling, of criminal behavior, criminal gangs who go out organizing these poaching trips in Africa, which are feeding this ivory trade. And if you ban something and make it illegal, it seems that it's almost like a magnet to people. People want to know and want to get involved, and you get criminals getting involved in the fact that something's banned. I mean, they tried it in America with alcohol. They tried to ban alcohol and prohibition. They tried to stop people having alcohol, but it didn't work. They got gang warfare and criminals still producing alcohol and selling it, and the speakeasies and all places like that where they sold it. So banning something doesn't stop it. It's the same with the drugs market. People, for some reason, which is beyond my knowledge, still take drugs, and they want drugs. But once you push it underground and make it illegal, then that's when the criminals and the gangs and the black market comes into force and make it so that people who want to do these things can still do it. Now, I think that's not a very good approach. I don't think it's working. Animals are still being poached, and people are still buying ivory on the black market. So I think there ought to be a way where you license ivory. And I saw a program on the television where they'd confiscated from poachers huge mountains of ivory, and they just burnt them. Now, to me, that seemed to be a great waste. There's an industry that wants that ivory, and presumably are willing to pay for it. Now, if they'd have sold that ivory instead of burning it to the people legitimately licensed to work this legitimate ivory, if you might call it, then they could have used the money to protect the animals from poachers and people who were doing it illegally. Now, as I say, there's some places in the world, I mean, I don't know, I could be talking wrong here, but I believe that there's some places in the world where there are elephants and there's too many of them. They're so well protected and have such a sort of a good life that they breed, and there's actually too many elephants. And I can see where there's going to come a time when there's so many elephants in a reserve because there's just not enough room to house or to cater for huge quantities of elephants. And I can see a time coming when they'll have to cull elephants, and they'll have to deliberately go and kill elephants because there's just too many of them for the land that they've got to occupy. So again, there may well be, if they do cull elephants, that there's a lot of ivory about. Now I don't see as there's a harm, providing you do it through a proper licensed method of regulating it so that the ivory is regulated. And I think that if you buy ivory, now I buy coins. Now when I buy a coin from the Royal Mint, they always send me a certificate of authenticity. Now that's a certificate that proves that that is a legitimate coin bought through a legitimate legal place, and that all the necessary safeguards are put in place there so that it's genuine. Now why can't they do that with ivory? Now every piece of ivory that's sold should have a certificate saying where it came from and how it came about, to make sure that it was bought and produced in the correct way from I mean, there's ivory that they're digging up in Siberia and places like that, which comes from mammoths. Now these mammoths died thousands if not millions of years ago, and they're in the permafrost. So there's still a way that you can have ivory from woolly mammoths, and I'm sure there could be a better way of policing and safeguarding the elephants by having a licensing system and a certification of authenticity about the ivory that people buy, and therefore the people that work in the ivory carving business would not go out of business. Now there's no need really, in some ways, to carve ivory. I mean, I've been talking about it as a general term because people will always want ivory for one reason or another, but I've got another little thing here, and this is very beautiful. It's been carved, but this isn't ivory. It may look like ivory. It has all the hallmarks of a piece of ivory. It looks very white, but when you look at it more closely, especially in the back here, you will see that it's got little striations in it, little specks in it. So it's not pure white. Now this is almost certainly a piece of bone from an animal carcass of some sort. I mean, I don't think it's whale ivory or whalebone. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's certainly not ivory. It's some sort of bone. And I've got one or two things here that are carved, because I quite like carvings. This is a little carving of a little hare. As you know, I'm very fond of hares, and this is a little hare that's been carved. And I think this, again, I don't think it's ivory. I think it's a piece of bone that's been carved. Judging by the shape of it, it's been carved out of a piece of bone. Now I know that during the Crimean Wars and all that sort of thing, people were imprisoned in prisoner war camps, and they carved mutton bones, and they made things out of mutton bones, all sorts of elaborate carvings, and they're very valuable today. If you can find a carving that was done by the prisoners of war from the Crimean War or whatever, they're very valuable, and very beautiful they are too. But they look very much like ivory, but they're not ivory, they're bone. Now this is another little ivory figure. Now I think this is ivory, and judging by the colour of it, it's very old ivory. Now this is not white anymore, it's turned brown, and it's another little nesky, but it's turned brown. So ivory changes colour over time, and very old ivory can be recognised because it's taken on this brown sort of hue. Now there are other kinds of ivory which again look very similar to a darkened piece of ivory, and that's this. This is a little carving, very crudely done, and at first glance you may think, oh, that's a piece of ivory, but in actual fact it's not ivory at all. It's what they call fruit ivory, and it's actually a nut. It's been carved, and if you look on the back you can see that this is a nut. It's a seed out of some foreign fruit. I don't quite know what fruit it is, but they call it fruit ivory. Now there's no real reason why these particular nuts can't be taken over to China or whatever, and the ivory carvers can use their skills to carve this type of ivory so they don't go out of business and lose their livelihood, and I'm sure people would still buy it just the same. So there's no real need for using ivory, but and I think if they more or less made it legal for people to buy ivory through a better source, that the actual myth about ivory and the fact that you want it would sort of fade away, and people gradually, it would go out of fashion, and people would no longer want ivory. You know, if there was alternatives, things that look just as good and cost a lot less, perhaps, I don't know, because if you were rationing and only using ivory from elephants that died naturally, and that would limit the amount of ivory on the market, and if you could stop poaching, then that would limit the amount. So it would mean that things that are carved and made out of ivory would be very, very expensive, and I think people would just not buy it anymore. They'd just say, oh, I'm not paying that much for ivory when I can get something that's equally as good, that doesn't cost half as much. So as I say, it's a very controversial subject, and I'm sure some people may agree with me, they may disagree with me, I don't know, but I hope I haven't upset anybody by mentioning this. But because I'm dealing with teeth, you couldn't really make a video about teeth without mentioning ivory. But that really brings me to the end of this particular video. Now I've got some other pieces, bits and pieces of animals, skulls of animals, which I may put into another video on another day. But for now, I think that's all I've got to say about teeth. As I say, I'm very fond of teeth. I like collecting teeth, and I hope to do a little bit more on teeth. But till we see you again, this is Grandad signing out as usual and saying goodbye. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.